Yes, of course, Sunday, the SANFL Grand Final got underway. Eagles up against Glenelg. Most were predicting Glenelg to win it. They'd been on that 17-game winning streak. Well, it didn't turn out that way. 15-9-99 to 4-8-32 to say, wow, we would be an understatement. Luke Marchioro, our expert from the SANFL, joins us. Luke, wow, we.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Amy. Yeah, it was a pretty incredible afternoon. The Eagles started the better team and just continued with it for the rest of most of the afternoon. It was very impressive.
Mate, I think we spoke about it last week. We thought that Glenelg might get this one because their form had been so dominant over the year. You were a little concerned that they were going to be a bit rusty. You know, there'd been a gap, they'd lost to Port, didn't quite have the momentum that they'd had during the season. It was better than rusty.
Their form was very spluttery towards the back end of the year. They played 2 games, then they played the bottom 2 sides in the last couple of rounds before that Port Adelaide game, and then another bye leading into it. So they had a very disjointed preparation. I thought last week, getting the cobwebs out, the second half of that Eagles game, they played a lot better than the first half, and then comfortably dealt with South Adelaide last week. So I thought they'd take a bit of momentum into that, but the Eagles just came out better and dominated from clearance and dominated behind the ball, and that was really game over almost at half time.
We spoke to Joe Sheedy on the show here during the year, and he talked about how they'd replaced a lot of players, so it wasn't the same team returning. It was a different group, half a team almost. But then I heard his interview after the game, and he said a lot of his recruits were like for like, and he thought they stood up. Is that a pretty fair comment?
I think it's a really fair. When you look at, they lost 3 or 4 really small forwards. So James Rowe, Ryan Mansell and Lockie McNeil were all small forwards, and they replaced them with a lot of kids out of their junior system that had really good games on the weekend. Ben Jungfer, Kai Pudney and Jake Komatijani all played really important roles on the weekend. They got a lot of pressure out of those players, and it created opportunities for their really skillful players like the Menzel brothers and Tyson Stengel, who hit the scoreboard as they have all year.
In your opinion, what do you think Glenelg did wrong?
They got beaten at stoppage. Jack Hanneth picked up a hamstring injury early in the final series, and he was their number 1 ruck all year, and he really struggled. They moved him out of the ruck in the second half because they were getting killed out of centre clearance. So Jared Redden, who was an ex-Port Adelaide player, but he just dominated around the ground. His hit-outs to advantage were lethal and gave their midfield first look, which was really part of the game. And then when Glenelg got entries, they were under so much pressure. The Eagles intercept markers, Luke Thompson, they brought Rory Lehman back in. They had a field day down there, and they really just made it difficult for that Glenelg forward line, which was really spluttering on the weekend.
And let's have a talk about a couple of the Eagles players, mate. Jack Hayes, the Jack Odie medalist, of course. I mean, he had 25 disposals, 9 marks, 7 clearances, so he had an outstanding game. Riley Knight wasn't that far behind him, though.
They had a lot of really players. You could have thrown a blanket over 10 or 12 Eagles in that competition on the weekend. Hayes was brilliant around the ground. Just his size, and he's just such a noticeable guy. He's 195 centimetres, 95 kilos. He wears the short shorts, he wears his socks up. He's an old school footballer, and when you watch him around the ground, he's such a dominating presence. He's one of those guys that you really notice. But they've got guys like James Casitas won the McGarry medal. Kobe Much came over from Essendon. He had 28 and a goal on the weekend. So they had so many really contributors. It was a real even team performance, and it's the type that wins your grand finals.
It's a really interesting one. Jack Hayes had an X-ray because he got injured Wednesday night at training. Had an X-ray and some scans before the game. They hadn't got them back, and then Jade was told on game day that he's got a hairline fracture in his leg. So he's played with a hairline fracture to get the Jack Odie medal.
Yeah, and they told him it was a corky during the week to try and get him to play. So similar to Darren Burgess with Melbourne the week before, not telling Stephen May about the hamstring tear. So seems to work. They've got the best out of their players, and they got the result on the weekend.
I think that just shows how powerful the mind is in a way, a bit of placebo effect.
It is, I think, and I think he's a bit of a old school footballer. He's pretty tough, and I don't think he's missed too many games over the last 3 or 4 years with the Eagles, so I doubt he'd want to miss the grand final for anything, and it was probably the best way to go about it.
Hey mate, Stengel and the Menzel brothers, you touched on them before. They were dominant in the first half, but I mean, to be dominant the way they were, the flow has to come to them. They were just getting a lot of the footy.
Just that was that centre clearance dominance, and they were able to, when they weren't winning the ball from centre clearance, they got clean ball off half back, and every time they got the ball off half back, they just went. They played with such speed through the middle of the ground. These younger guys that we talked about, Jungfer, Komatijani, they got the ball to ground through the middle. They used their speed, and the Glenelg forwards, they were turned around. They got them back to goal, and so many of their shots on goal came from that sort of 10 to 20 metres out range. They got easy shots that they were able to convert, and when Glenelg went in, it was a lot of wide entries, a lot of deep entries, so tougher shots at goal and harder to kick those spots. So I think it was a more credit to the way the Eagles moved the ball through the middle of the ground, and probably a little bit of a lack of pressure from Glenelg as well.
And in the press conference, Sheedy said that it was probably their best game of the year. Do you agree with that?
they built really nicely in the back half of the year. Sort of after that bye, they got beaten by North Adelaide at Prospect in a really close game, and they had the week off after that, and then they comfortably, won the last 2 games. They dispatched Centrals in the last round by 110 points, which is a really professional performance. Beat Norwood, pretty unconvincingly in that first final, but their last 2 weeks against Glenelg, that was as good a footy as any team's played in the competition this season, and they've got a game plan that's stood up in finals now, not only this year, but last year as well, and their ability to kick 5 or 6 goals in 20 minutes and blow a game open like they did in last year's grand final and like they did in this year's grand final, not many teams can stop that in that competition.
I mean, we want to talk a lot about the Eagles because they were so dominant, but Glenelg had an unbelievable season. I mean, there probably were 5 or 6 games during the year that they could have lost, that they were able to get themselves out of trouble and win. So they have a 17-game winning streak. Does all that good part of the season get lost because of the margin in the final?
I think they can take a lot out of the year. I think they'll be very, very disappointed. Probably as a club, they were, top of the ladder in the under-18s, lost the grand final as well. So they're in a very similar position there as well. So there was a bit of talk in the year that they were going to win all 5 grand finals, and they've probably only come away with 2, the women's and the reserves in the end. So I think as a club, they'll probably be disappointed. They'll have a lot of these players come back next year. Only Chris Curran and Marlon Motlop have announced their retirements. So, and they've got a really good group coming through. Both of these teams, their under-18s played each other in the grand final. Both teams made the preliminary final or the grand final in the reserves. So they've got great depth, and they're definitely going to be around the mark again next season.
Now, speaking about people potentially leaving, we've got I don't know if it's a reliable source or not, but we've got word that, Jade Sheedy might be going to St Kilda as a development coach. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't at the moment. I think he's sort of enjoying the week at the minute with the grand final, but he's definitely one of these guys. He's been successful wherever he's been. So the people at Athelton spoke so highly of him when he got his opportunity out there, and he took them from Division 3, I think, up to Division 1, and he's won 2 flags in 2 years with the Eagles. So it is an obvious transition for the next step to get up there to play at AFL level, but I think he'd be a fantastic in that role. He's been great at bringing players through into the system. So whether that's AFL guys coming back and helping them get their love of footy back, like a guy like Riley Knight or Tyson Stengel, or bringing guys through to the next level like James Rowe last year and these other guys coming through like Comet Tijani and even Jack Hayes this year to go up to that next level, he'd be perfect in a role like that.
Yeah, my understanding on hearing that rumour has been that they're really keen on him to get over there because his development of the younger players has been exceptional, but also the ability to get the older players to get back and play good footy. So I've heard the same story. I think St Kilda have got him on the radar. And
everyone speaks highly of him at West Torrens. I think they'd be very disappointed to lose him, but completely understanding of that situation. He's been superb at that footy club, and there'd be plenty of people that would be looking for that Eagles job because I think it's a pretty sought-after position in the competition.
Do you reckon the Eagles, the way they set their defence, they've been pretty solid all year. They weren't just suddenly one of the best defending teams in the grand final. They've been one of the best most of the year, and I heard Sheeds talk about how they have a set way they play their defence, and then they just tidied it up a bit. And you said they were cherry ripe coming into that final. Was it the defensive end that you thought they won it in? Was it the midfield? Or you thought they just won it all over the ground?
They won it all over the ground. I think the game starts at centre clearance, and Jared Rennan dominated Jack Hanneth, and that was sort of the swing in the game. So the first use went to the Eagles midfielders, and the forwards were so dangerous. When they get one-on-one opportunities, and guys like Matty Snook and Alex Martini don't get opportunities to take intercept marks for Glenelg, they get one-on-ones and the Eagles forwards kick goals. Where at the other end of the ground, it was Luke Thompson and Pat Graffita versus Liam McBean. It was never one-on-ones inside forward 50, and when you get that clean first use of the footy, it makes it a lot easier to defend as well. So I think it starts in the midfield, but around the ground they were just dominant.
Matty Snook, probably the best player for the Bays, you think?
I thought he was great. I thought Matty Allen tried really hard as well.
Yep.
He's probably the unsung hero in that Glenelg team as that lead-up, hit-up forward as well. So they all had a pretty dirty day, but those midfielders tried their guts out, but just in the end fell a bit short, and they'll be left with a pretty sour taste in their stomach after that one.
And you say you were at the game. What was the vibe like?
Crowd was fantastic, actually. 23,000 was a really, really good crowd considering the COVID restrictions and the inclement weather that was sort of forecast for the long weekend. So to get basically a sellout in those conditions was really good. I think they'll be pretty pleased. The 2 curtain raisers were good games as well. Glenelg winning the reserves and a pretty entertaining under-19s game. So a few of the South Australian prospects pushing their draft claims as well was a nice appetite for the entree for the main course in the league grand final.
Hey, Luke, we've really enjoyed your time, mate. We know you're a busy man. You've been on the money, everything you've said. You picked the grand final winner, no doubt about it. If we're going to be betting next year, mate, we'll get you in and get the tips. We can make a lot of money. Appreciate your time, Luke. Time to go to a break. Back with more in a moment.